Hey, if we haven't met yet, I'm Ganten Kirby with Keller Williams Golden Isles, local realtor here on St. Simon's Island. After 10 years of living in Atlanta, my wife and I decided we were ready for a slower pace, so we moved back to my hometown of St. Simon's Island. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel so you can follow around what's going on. So while in Atlanta, I worked for Keller Williams Midtown on 17th and Peachtree. Worked all over the city, really had a good life, lived in Atlantic Station, Virginia Highland, Morningside, and we finally settled down around Emory, lived there for about 5 years. Our kids went to preschool in the Virginia Highland neighborhood. It was kind of an easy commute for me, not so much for my wife. And really everything was going well as far as business goes. The greatest thing about, I think, living in the city was that there was always something big going on, something big to do. There was always a big football game to go to, concerts, pretty much every entertainer came through there. The other great thing about living there was the airport. You could literally go anywhere in the world. We had a great church that we really liked to go to as part of North Point Ministries. We were in the Decatur City one. The other thing we kind of enjoyed was that we were inside the perimeter, and so we weren't having to deal with getting on the highways every day to make our commute. My normal commute would have been going through Virginia Highland, then going through Ansley, and then right into Midtown, which made life a little bit easier. But again, depending on where the day took me, I could always be stuck in traffic on the highway with nowhere to go. So one thing we noticed while living in Atlanta and how great everything was is that we would come down to St. Simon's for the holidays or just a quick vacation over the weekend. And we noticed when we left, we were always kind of sad. And then the big thing we started noticing is that when we pulled back into the city and we'd see the skyline, we would just immediately tense up. It was one of those things that just never went away. So one of the big drivers that really caused us to consider moving was the pandemic. It really got us to focus on most important for us, which was really having more time to focus on our family, which meant having a slower lifestyle. So what made us choose St. Simon's was a couple of things. One, we already had some rental property here, so it was kind of an easy place to move because we already had somewhere we could move into very easily. We also have family here. My parents live here, my brother and his family live here. And then obviously I also grew up here, so I already had some friends here, doing life here, enjoying it. One other caveat I would say is that my wife grew up vacationing here, and she always wanted to move back to the beach after going to college at Charleston, and so that was just kind of icing on the cake to prompt us and to make it where this was just kind of an easier transition for us to move back to. The other big kind of sticking points for us were that it allowed our kids to grow up, in a smaller community where we kind of knew everybody, where everybody was looking out for one another. My daughter gets to ride her bike to school every day. After school, we're not really concerned where she is. She's just riding around. So there were a lot of reasons it just made St. Simon's a natural choice for us. So once we got moved, our first priority was to get our kids settled into school and activities. Our oldest daughter was going to be starting at St. Simon's Elementary, and our middle daughter, or our younger daughter at the time, who's our middle daughter now, was starting in the St. Simon's Methodist Church preschool, which were both great fits for them and really easy for us. The other big thing we were looking for is to get them in activities. Both started getting into dance and piano, and then naturally once rec season started, they started playing soccer and softball and blastball and all of the fun activities that are available. So something else that was really nice is that when we were in Atlanta, my wife Cecile, she would commute to Buckhead every day, and even though it was only about 6 miles, it would take her 45 minutes. And because she was going essentially north from our house and our kids' school was south, she never got to take the kids to school ever. It was always on me. Not a big deal because it was kind of on my route, but it always kind of stunk for her because she never got to take the kids to school, never got to drop them off. Fast forward, we moved to here, and instead of dealing with a 45-minute commute, all of a sudden she's taking our kids to school in a golf cart, and it's taken about 5 minutes. Talk about a huge change in your life and something that really makes you, be thankful that this is the way your new life is. The other thing that she did was during the pandemic, her company went 100% remote, and when she moved here, she just kind of continued with that. At first, she found a co-working space that she worked at down in the village. That was great for a couple of years, and then after we built a new house, we were lucky enough to include an office for her, so then she went from working in a co-working space and maybe stopping off at coffee shops here and there to working from home out of our home office. So as far as myself transitioning down here business-wise, it was relatively pretty seamless. I worked for the Keller Williams office in Midtown, and luckily enough, they'd opened a Keller Williams office on St. Simon's a couple of years before we moved here. So the transition was pretty seamless because we had pretty much all the same systems. The other big bonus was that Atlanta, when you went to show a property, it could take 2 to 3 to 4 hours. Whereas to here, you can show one property and be back to your office inside of 20 minutes, which left me with a lot of free time on my hand, which was nice because I always wanted to get more into passive investing. I already owned a couple mobile home parks here and there, and with the extra time I was able to focus on acquiring a few more, and having that passive income and having more time on my hands allows me really to embrace the island lifestyle, get to go to the beach more, get to go fishing more, get to golf more. All the things that while living in Atlanta you think about, dream about, but you're not driving 30 minutes to go play a 1 hour game, whereas here it's a 5-minute drive. It's easy even to do on a lunch break if you want. So after we moved, here are some of the things that we came to really start love living on the island. I would say the top thing for me, I think, was I really got to start seeing friends everywhere. Even at daycare drop off, it was almost like being in high school again. And then even at, going to the gym, going to the beach, you always just see somebody you know. Even at the grocery store at 7 a.m., you'll see somebody you know, and it's just always fun. And then I'd say a lot of the other things are just the activities that you have the time to do now. The other nice things and fun things is we bought a sailboat, Hobie Cat. We get to take it out in the summer. I get to teach my kids how to sail. Going on long bike rides with the kids is always fun. A lot of Saturdays or Sundays, we will, especially Sunday if we're not going to church, in the morning we'll go get a boat, and depending on the seas or the wind, we might be skiing or we might be island hopping, and then that afternoon we'll find ourselves at the beach or the pool. And that was all in just one day. Those are things we never could have done. The other big thing is here, the rec department does a great job. So getting to, coach all my kids' teams, getting to coach their soccer teams, their basketball teams, their softball teams. It's just one of those imprints that I think is, really impactful for them. I remember my coaches from being young, and so it's always fun to be around. I talked about earlier about you can't go anywhere without seeing somebody but I'll also go places, whether it be at the school, at the grocery store, or restaurants, and I'll have a young kid come up to me like, "Hey coach, how's it going?" It's always, kind of a neat thing to know that it's that small of a community where everybody really knows everybody and everybody's looking out for one another. The other cool thing is our kids ride their bikes all around, and if they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing on their bike, 9 times out of 10 we hear about it from one of our friends. And then, they come home and they're wondering why they're in trouble, and you're like, "Well, you crossed the crosswalk without looking," and they're looking at you and you're like, "Yeah, Miss Kara just told us that. What were you doing?" Well, those are, great things that I think make it super special to live here. So once we moved here, I think everybody's always concerned, what will your challenges and adjustments be? The biggest challenge for me was that I had a 10-year business in Atlanta and it was completely referral based. I basically sold that when I left. And so kind of starting over and to think about what all that took, obviously that's always going to be a big challenge. Luckily, referrals from Atlanta do flow here. A lot of my Atlanta clients and Atlanta friends decided to move here as well. So that was one challenge that was, kind of easy to overcome, but always something that stuck in the back of your mind. And then I think the other thing that kind of always stuck out to us to begin with, which really wasn't something that we had to overcome, more of just think about, was that, when your daughter's dance starts in 5 minutes, you don't have to run out the door like you're on fire because you're still going to be early. Getting out of that Atlanta time frame adjustment and not always being in a hurry and not always thinking you're going to be late because of traffic probably took us about 2 years to get over. I can't tell how many times we got places extremely early and had to sit in a parking lot. So advice for families thinking about moving here. I think the biggest thing would be obviously, to come here and drive around. But then the main thing I would say is to pick out what end of the island you want to live on. If you're going to live on the north end of the island, obviously, you're farther away from the beaches, farther away from the village. There's more newer style cluster homes up there, and you're going to get more bang for your buck. However, there's only one road that leads to the north of the island, and believe it or not, you will start dealing with some traffic. There is an elementary school up there, so it's not the end of the world. And then obviously, if you come to the south end, there's just more infrastructure down here, more roads, so there's less likelihood that you'll have to ever sit in traffic. That's where I live, and I never ever have to deal with it. It's really just kind of like the lifestyle that you want to live. North end, you're going to be in your car more. South end, you're going to be in your golf cart more, is the way I would really frame it. Other than that, I think everything else is just kind of getting used to having more time on your hands. You're going to live in a little bit slower pace, but there's also going to be a lot of activities to do. For us, moving back to St. Simons has been one of the best decisions we've ever made. We really enjoy living here. And if you have any questions or concerns or just thoughts about what life is like here, or is it really how I framed it, feel free to give me a call. I'd love to tell you more about our experience. I know there's only so much I can go over in this video. And if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on everything going on in St. Simons Island.